Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Spouse Link live stream. I am so excited to have you here with me today. My name is Anna Larson. I am with the Spouse Link. I'm your Spouse Link ambassador today, and I am excited to have a conversation about the Benefits Disability at Discharge program. So take an ibuprofen, put a bandaid on it. That's like the tongue-in-cheek answer to treating all of our service members' physical and mental aches and pains. But now it's time to transition. And you know that ibuprofen and band-aids just aren't going to cut it. And it's time to file your VA disability claim. So our guest today, Tyrone Hewitt, is an expert in accessing disability benefits and knowing how to make sure that your service member is compensated for the illnesses and injuries that are caused by their active duty service. Now, on the personal side, I totally wish that I had known more about this before our transition out of active duty. My VA service member claim was finalized almost a year after his retirement date. A lot of that was due to the fact that we retired when it was COVID timeframe, and the BDD program was not really available. The offices were closed. There was nobody available to really help us out. But I guess what I'm saying is that has changed. So don't be like our family, and you're going to want to know the information that's on this live stream today. So as I mentioned before, thank you for joining me for another Spouse Link live stream. I'm Anna Larson, your Spouse Link ambassador for transitioning military families. I'm also a copywriter and a digital marketer. I'm a homeschool mom, and I am a retired military spouse. These live streams are for military spouses and service members and military families that are looking for connection and support as they near and cross over into transition and retirement from the active duty world. Now, Spouse Link was created in 2012 by AFMA, the American Armed Forces Mutual Aid Association, and it's supposed to help support, inform, and inspire military spouses around the world. This live stream is one of our efforts to do that. As we dive into today's topic, please be sure to leave comments, share your experiences, let us know where you're joining us from, and more importantly, interact with me and our guest today, Tyrone. I am super excited to have him on. So I'm going to start. I'm going to pull up his bio, let you know a little bit more about him so I can get him onto the stream and we can start talking. So Tyrone is a transition and family employment readiness program counselor with the Navy, where he assists clients with career development, creating a job search strategy, resume writing, preparing for interviews, searching for DoD skill bridge opportunities, and understanding educational benefits and all the other things that go along with transition or retirement. So he has been there, done that, and supported hundreds of service members through this process. In his personal time, Tyrone enjoys hanging out with his family, reading histories, biographies, and autobiographies, and working in the yard as an unprofessional landscaper. And he loves Carnival cruises. I didn't get a chance to ask him, but we'll have to figure out what his most favorite cruise has been. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to bring up Tyrone. Hi, Tyrone. So
How's
good
it going?
to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am super excited to have this conversation today. Benefits disability at discharge is one of those big things that every service member who's leaving the military has to go through, right? But very misunderstood and feels like a difficult process.
Yeah, I think it's I think part of the problem is the process with claims in the VA has changed so much over the last 5, 10, even 20 years, where somebody could be getting like, for instance, so I retired in 2018. My dad retired in 96 from the Army. If he and I were talking to VA, his experience and that process would have changed dramatically from what I did 22 years ago. So, and I think that's kind of some of the issues where people are going off of old data, old processes, instead of maybe going into the website, speaking to a VSO, getting the right information, and then going through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, that the information's there, but there's so much happening at transition time.
Yeah.
That you just miss things. And so, okay, so we're going to help anyone who's watching this live stream. We're here to help you, right? Like, that's the whole point of this right now.
Yeah.
So let's start with just our very first question. Let's just talk about what is the Benefits Disability at Discharge program, or the BDD program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the BDD program is an opportunity for a service member to start and finish their VA disability claim process before they even separate, right? So a service member anytime between 90 days and 180 days from their separation can file that claim. And I usually recommend that they get with a veteran service organization and get a representative who's accredited. You can use, like, you're in Texas, so TVC has them, DAV, VFW. They'll help you through that process. And it's important to remember that it's 90 to 180 days before your EAOS, your EAS or ETS or whatever you call it. So it's not from when you're going to start skill bridge or you go house hunting, job hunting leave, or even terminal leave. It's from your last paid date. And the goal of the program is to file your claim, right? And hopefully with a representative, an accredited representative. And what that will do is will notify the VA. The VA at that point will start contacting usually contract organizations that will now do your compensation pension exams. So your claim is filed. All your exams are done. So if I file my back, my neck, my mental health, the VA is going to re-examine all that. All that stuff, it should be done ideally before you grab that DD-214 and you officially separate. It usually works pretty well. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. During COVID, like everything else, there were a lot of obstacles. A lot of the offices weren't open. You couldn't file a claim. You couldn't get a compensation pension exam. But ideally, that claim process is done before you separate. You know, kind of like you said, when you're retiring or even separating, there's a lot going on. You may be looking for a skill bridge. You're looking for a job. You may be relocating. You're trying to plan a retirement ceremony. All these things. Oh, now you're adding in a VA claim, which can be just another added stressor.
Yeah. So why is this even important? Let me just ask that. Like, what's the difference whether you do it before you leave the service or whether you do it after the service? Why is there a program specifically to support this process before leaving active duty?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say out of everything else, one, the convenience, and two, what I find with a lot of service members. So if it works through a BDD, always encourage it. I do understand with some individuals with relocating and everything else going on. They're like, hey, I'm just going to wait until I get back to my home of record or home of selection after I separate. But what I find with individuals in many cases who plan on doing a claim after they separate, at that point, it becomes back burner. They're like, oh, I'm going to do it when I get home. Then they're like, okay, it's the summertime. I'm going to do it during the fall. Then like, okay, the kids are starting school. I started my new job. Let me do it at the beginning of next year. So you're always kind of pushing it to the wayside. But when you're in that transition mode, which is part of, when you're in that transition mode or that retirement mode, that BDD process allows you to implement that until you're transitioning out of the military, where it's an important process where, you've put in your calendar, you prioritized it, you filed the claim, you've done your exams. Now you're just waiting. And it's done. Once you separate, it's kind of like, yeah, I'll get to it. And I've seen that. I'm gonna be honest with you. I've seen that in far too many cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say from personal experience, trying to get access to some of the resources you need to file those claims once you're retired is difficult because you're no longer a priority. You're not an active duty service member. It's kind of we'll get around to it when we can get it. Or I don't know how to access your record anymore because you're not active, or I don't know how to find that information for you, or, and if you have had a long career and you've got medical records from throughout the 1990s here, right? Like decades ago. And you're trying to put all of that together that you need, it can get really, really, really hard to do. So I'm a big fan of trying to do this before you separate from the military. I think it's part of that process that just makes for that smoother transition.
That's it. I'm sorry to interrupt. No, that's a really, really good point. I do see individuals who plan on doing it afterwards. And kind of to your point, when you're in and you need a copy of your record, it's very easy. Well, I don't want to say it's easy, but you can go down to your military treatment facility, fill out the appropriate paperwork, and get your record in a day or 30 days, whatever their timeline is. Once you separate and you have that DD-214 and you're outside that gate, you're back burner. You'll be lucky. I'm going to be honest with you. You're going to be lucky to get some special attention, right? And the VA can get your record and all that, but if you can get your own record while you're active duty from the military treatment facility, particularly, or any other facilities you've been to, that's going to be one less headache that you're going to encounter after you get out.
It's one of those hard realities we have to kind of accept.
Yeah.
That, you know, that we no longer become like a top number one. Doesn't matter what rank you were or weren't, right? It doesn't matter. You are no longer the priority the active duty service members are. So, okay. So let's talk about the steps that you're going to take in order to use the BDD program. And I just want to like reiterate, like there's two things, right? One is CONUS and one is OCONUS. So in the States and out of state. So let's start with, I'm going to add this right here. Let's start with the steps to using the BDD program when you are in the United States.
Okay. Yeah. So that's some good stuff right there. So one of the first things I would do is I would get hold of a veteran service organization, right? And those are those accredited organizations that can help you with your claims. Most of your states have the organizations. Texas has TVC, Texas Veterans Commission. In Virginia, we have Virginia Department of Veteran Services, VFW, DAV. And you really want to get an idea of what their timeline is and what services they can provide. Let them know you plan on separating or retiring. They're going to ask you typically what your last paid date is and give you an idea of how soon they can see you to either look at your record with or for you and help you with that claim. And that's going to give you an idea of when you're going to need to get your service treatment records, because it's all about timelines, right? You don't want to speak to a VSO and they say, well, we can see you in 30 days, which can be typical. But then you go to your MTF and they're like, oh, it's going to take us 2 months to get your records. Now you can go to your MTF and get your records maybe sooner and speak to them, but you got to figure out how soon, can you get those records? And mind you, hopefully everything is either in Alta or Genesis, right? I've seen cases where people have been overseas, which is a little bit more difficult, but also start getting all your records from any civilian practitioners you may have seen. You may have been in a car accident and taken to the emergency room. That may have not made it into your record. You may have seen a specialist. That may have not also made it into your record. So you're going to want to do all your record gathering, work with your accredited VSO, and figure out how soon they can see you, right? And they're going to tell you more likely, hey, we can't really sit down with you or at least file your claim until that 180-day mark. All right. Yeah. And then also
submit it early. You can submit it earlier, but that 180-day mark is where they start the process. Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is, so sometimes the VSO will sit down with you even before that 180-day, but they can't even submit it to the VA before that 180-day mark.
Got it. Okay.
And some are really, really busy. They're like, man, I can't even get you in. Right. I do know in some areas they do have classes, they do have one-on-ones, but they may sit down and give you maybe a preliminary conversation or talk and say, hey, I looked through your record. You went once for headaches. How often do you have headaches? You may say, or the service member may say, man, I have headaches every day, or several times a day or several times a month. They may say, well, we only see it once. You may want to get you may want to be seen again, quite honestly, because one headache over 20 years ain't cutting it. They may say you may want to get seen, do you have migraines, cluster migraines, or anything else like this? What's causing the headaches, neck injury, anything else like that, to kind of give you an idea if your record is any decent. But that could be VSO determinant. Some are really busy, some can make the time. Something that the VA has changed, they came out with the Separation Health Assessment Part A assessment form, which you can find on the VA DBQs online. I would look at that early on also and start filling that out. It's a really good health assessment. It goes over pretty much every part of your body, and I like it because it can be a reminder. You could say, man, you know what? I do have joint issues, but I've never been seen. Maybe I do need to get seen. Or I've been seen once for a sprained ankle in 2012. It still gives me issues. I use Motrin. I use an ankle brace, but maybe I need a follow-up. I would also encourage, honestly, spouses to look at that also. Because what we do as veterans is a lot of times, or service members, a lot of times we self-medicate, and I think we normalize our ailments. I just had a conversation with my wife, I think it was last week, and I'm like, man, I have a headache. And she's like, you always have a headache. But I've normalized that. you
Yeah.
know, right?
I was
And
gonna
there
say that. Yes. Yes.
it is like, I'm just going to take some Motrin or leave and carry on. I'm going to put some Bengay on. And, I'm not a health professional, but when you have those, I'll give you an example. So right now my hip is hurting. In 2014, it started giving me issues. I probably should have been seen for it a lot. Probably should have been seen for it a number of times. I never was. And it's a constant issue now. Back then it was kind of like, I don't know what was going on, but now I didn't do anything active. Right now I'm kind of like, oh, my right hip hurts. I should have gotten seen, but if I go through this health assessment, I may check it off and say hip pain. Man, I've never been seen for that. Let me make an appointment with my PCM and say, hey, you know what? I always have this ache in my right hip or left hip or whatever the body part is, and there's no cause for it. I didn't go for a 5-mile run this morning.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything. It just hurts. And they may say, let's get you an x-ray or an MRI, and that could take time. Or they may say, let me ask you some more questions and say, hey, you have some kind of itis, who knows what.
An
But,
itis.
yeah, looking at that separation health form, getting your treatment records and getting a VSO is all very important with creating your plan.
So we have this question that came in, and it kind of plays to what you were just talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
How important it is to understand your very own medical records and when you're going through the process. And I just want to reiterate here, because this is so true, right? It is so true that you normalize what you have.
Yeah.
If you're not talking to your spouse or your partner, that you need to be, because they're the ones who are going to say, you are down every other day with a headache. You have been complaining about your foot for about the last 17 years.
Yeah.
What about that pain in your neck that you're constantly having to put like a cold wrap on, and they're going to remind you of these things that for you have become like a standard everyday, I'm going to call it another itis, right? Because I love that term right there, but also because when you involve your spouse, not only are they going to be able to help remind you of that, but they're going to help you remember, who did you go see for this? How frequently? And I also love that you pointed out, if you have, our service members are conditioned to not go to sick call, right?
Yeah.
Unless you are mostly dead, you're not going to sick call, right? Or have a fever that requires you to stay home.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you probably don't have that constant showing of need of care for some of these itises that you are looking at. And when you get to the VA, they're like, one headache in 20 years. I mean, what you just said, that's not going to cut it. You're not going to get a disability rating, even if you've been having these nonstop for 15 of those 20 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Amy's asking where we can find the medical health assessment. Amy, I'm going to drop a link to the information that I'm providing today. I'm going to drop that in just a minute while we put Tyrone onto the next topic. So you'll have that in the comments, and it will take you to the page that gives you the, it's going to give you the in the United States, but it's got links to overseas, and it's got links to the self-assessment form. So you can look at all of that information. But okay, I'm going to move on. Let's move on and let's talk about OCONUS. If you are OCONUS and stationed overseas, what is the difference?
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest with you. Part of the difference could be the inconvenience, right? And that's anything if you're overseas, looking for a job, looking for a house, looking for school for your kids, working with the VA. And they just updated that website third or fourth week of June. So it seems like there's definitely contact in Korea, and also Germany. But if you're in some of those other areas, Rhoda, Italy, or Spain, Italy, Japan, it could be a little bit more difficult. And the reason why is because part of the BDD process requires you not only to file your claim within 90 to 180 days, but you have to be available for an examination within 45 days of filing the claim. Right. So, and that's even stateside. If I was stateside and I file the claim, but I know I'm going in and out of sea, that could cause issues because they may want to file an appointment while I'm on the boat for 2 or 3 weeks. A lot of that could happen more so if you're overseas, because if you file a claim, and I would definitely contact some of those groups in Korea or Germany to see if there's any kind of contracted organizations that can do a claim. They may say, yeah, absolutely, we can fit your needs in Spain, Italy, Japan, wherever. but they may say no, because part of that key element of filing the claims during BDD is getting the examination portion. So it's really the convenience of being located where you can, receive assistance from a VSO and get those examinations done.
Yeah, from what I read online, you have to be able to access those offices at Camp Humphrey or at Landstuhl in order to be assessed properly. So if that's not an option for you, then I mean, we're going to go next into like what would stop you from being able to use a BDD claim. Clearly, that's one of them. And it's kind of a bummer for overseas spouses because it eliminates a benefit that for not early retirement. That's not what I'm trying to say, but benefit for getting that disability process started earlier.
They had a lot more contacts on there, and they removed them. And I kind of saw that trending where I don't know what happened, but I kind of saw the trend where less assistance was being provided. So I think they eventually went on and just removed some of the other contacts in Japan and some of the other areas.
Yeah. Okay. So this is good to know. If you're stationed overseas, look into it earlier rather than later. Don't wait till even that 180-day mark, right? Like start that process a year before that, even just so you know whether or not it's even going to be something you're going to be able to do from your location. Let's jump into, I'm going to just move to the very next slide. Let's talk about when it's not an option and what would stop a service member from being able to use this program.
Yeah, so and the screen is perfect. Some of these issues, if a person has any of these, I'm going to be honest with you, they may be going through the medical board process or the IDE process, particularly if they have a serious injury, they're terminally ill, they're already going to be discharged while being treated with the VA. You're waiting for a character of discharge that could be determined whether or not you're even eligible for some stuff. Kind of what I pointed to earlier, you can't go to a VA exam during a 45-day period. So these are really important. If you don't think you meet any of these, what you don't want to do is, clog the system or make it more complicated or more stressful on yourself, right? You added a medical condition to your original claim when you had less than 90 days. Even with that point, you could do a BDD and you could actually do a claim if you added something else after the BDD was completed. And then obviously right here, Landstuhl, Germany, and then Camp Humphreys. And that list was a lot larger. But yeah, stateside, great, Landstuhl, and Camp Humphreys are definitely the areas. Yeah.
This is the list they currently have on the website for BDD. So I am curious about the adding a medical condition to your original claim. Does that reset your time frame? Or do you do your BDD claim and then you have to go through a secondary process? And what if the your new claim you're adding because something was left off? This also happened to my family, by the way.
Yeah.
So if you left something off, or sometimes, and I will say this, that actually the claim, when we received the paperwork, they had left something off the claim and we had to go back through and resubmit that process. Does it change? Will it change your eligibility? Will it change your process, the actual claim amount? You know what I'm saying?
That's a good. So what that will actually do is, and there are kind of two ways to look at it, and I'll use myself as an example. So let's say on my claim, I put, sprained ankle, and I had an X-ray that showed a sprained ankle. And during that, and I filed my claim, but during that time, I got an MRI done. The doc says, hey, let's get an MRI done to make sure we have full visibility of your injury. I can actually add the notes or that MRI to my claim because the claim has already been submitted to my existing claim. I'm just adding additional evidence, physical therapy, X-ray. But if I filed for my right ankle, and now I want to add in my left ankle, if I add in my left ankle and that's not even on the claim, it's going to pull it out of BDD and it's going to pull it into a fully developed claim, which can actually prolong it. So in cases like that, this is what I would typically advise. If you're still being seen for ailments that you claimed, right, I would submit the additional evidence. Maybe you were prescribed more medication. Maybe you're taking physical therapy. Maybe you're seeing mental health physician. Maybe you got an MRI X-ray, and that's all additional evidence on everything that you've claimed. You can upload it in your VA account, in your va.gov benefits account. If you're trying to add totally new ailments, I would just wait until your initial claim closes, right? They're going to send you a decision letter. And then you can always file a new claim and say, okay, yeah, now my left ankle, my right knee, my left hip, and file those 4 or 5 or 6 things separately on its own through the fully developed claim process.
Perfect. Okay, one more item on this list that I kind of want to talk with you about. You can't go to a VA exam during the 45-day period after you submit your claim. So when we say that, is this because you can't get time off work? Is it moving? Is it all of the above? Like, what would prevent you from being able to do that VA exam other than living overseas and there's not a provider available?
You know what? I think the only thing that would probably prevent anybody from not being able to make an exam is if they absolutely know, and I'll speak from the Navy standpoint, is, hey, I know I'm going to and from out to sea. Other than that, if you file your claim, you should have, quite honestly, and I know it's easier said than done, open conversations with your family and your job. Hey, because what's going to happen is you're going to get a VSO, you're going to file your claim, they're going to submit it. The VA is going to look at that claim, assign a rater, right? And this person looks at all your evidence and they decide your claim. They're going to contact a contracted organization to do your claim. It could be QTC or any of these other organizations. They're going to contact you and they're going to say, we've been contacted by the VA, Mr. Hewitt, for your VA disability claim. We'd like to set up an appointment so we can do all your compensation pension exams. If they call you and they give you an option, that's great. But sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes they're going to call you and say, hey, and they did it to me. They're going to say, hey, we have you scheduled for January 27th, 28th, and the 29th. We need you here at these times, dates and times, right? And that's why you need to be available, because you need to be able to say, nothing else is going to take priority over this, right? Yeah. Obviously, if you're gone, you're on field training, or let's say you're TDY or TAD. Like, for whatever reason, your command thinks, oh, we're going to send you to get some more Navy training or Marine training or Army training. Like,
right before you're gone.
I retire in 7 months. What are we doing? Right. But I would just kind of let everybody know, hey, there may be some dates and times where I'm going to be unavailable, because those examinations are really, really important to make. If you miss those, they can essentially deny it and say, okay, person missed examination, we're going to deny it. And then you have to go through that whole process again.
Yes, I will say from personal experience, and actually this is funny, my across the street neighbor is retiring right now. They're going out of town for a wedding this weekend. Yeah. And they said, if a FedEx envelope shows up, I text you, have you go get it and open it so we know, because they're waiting on the appointments coming to FedEx so that he can make sure that he's there. He's on terminal leave right now. And it is definitely one of those things where they've been like, it has been instructed. Yeah. If you miss this, if you miss the appointment, we're denying you whatever this issue is, kind of thing. Anyway,
yeah, that's a good point. No, let me touch on that real quick. So that's good. So one, you should get contacted one of 3 ways at least: the phone call, maybe an email, or definitely a FedEx letter. So I always tell everybody, I get it. All the telemarketers and everybody else calls you, and you're like, I'm gonna monitor these phone calls. I'd be answering all those phone calls. I think they called me for my first QTC appointment from the West Coast. It was like 8 or 8:30 at night, right? So you want to answer all your phone calls. You want to check your mail, check your email, and then kind of to your point with the person being on leave. I was even to a point. So we talked about me loving Carnival cruises. We didn't schedule my retirement Carnival cruise until after I did my VA claims, because my concern was I was going to be out of the country for a week. And, I've heard of cases. I know people, if they've been contacted and say, hey, we have an examination on Friday, and you're like, it's Tuesday.
Yes.
Right. So you got to kind of keep your finger on that. You got to keep your eye on the ball.
And he's not kidding. I'm just going to throw this out. That is also personal experience. If we would get something and he would be like, I just looked at my thing and I have an appointment tomorrow morning at 10. I didn't know about. and it just
Absolutely.
came in, 48 hours earlier. So you
Yeah.
really have to be watching for when those appointments are scheduled. That's super important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Lynn. I'm going to throw up. It says, adding another condition after you've been awarded a BDD, allow the VA to review your entire medical condition.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one of the concerns with people is, I've heard it and I've seen it where, hey, I filed a claim, and now they're going to look at all the other conditions, right? And people are usually concerned about that if they have a claim that's been finalized or adjudicated for years, right? They're like, hey, I'm going to add something on. Let me review the whole record. Let's have the VA review the whole record, which can be a valid concern, I suppose. If a person does a BDD, right, and they get the final decision and they add stuff within that, I would say 12 months mark, I think you're going to be safer than years down the line, because it's still, I hate to say this, under assumption that those things are still valid and they're not going to reevaluate you. I'm assuming the concern is being reevaluated and then maybe the rating decreased or taken away. But if you did it right afterwards, or at least within that 12 months, I honestly think you'd probably be okay.
That's good information. So thank you, Lynn, for bringing that up as another one of those maybe concerns or challenges for adding information after the fact. So let's talk about, I'm going to pull this slide up again. We're going to talk about if you can't use the BDD program. You mentioned a fully developed disability claim, and then I wanted to throw in there also the standard disability claim. Can you talk us through these two things? If BDD is not a program you can use, what's your next option and what are you doing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the BDD timeline is between 90 and 180 days. If you don't file that claim at the 90-day mark, but you file at the 80-day mark, you can actually still do what they call a fully developed claim. And that's kind of a mistake I see people make. They think the BDD is the only option. And there could be a number of reasons why a person may not. They're overseas, they're relocating. There are a lot of things going on. If they want to do it at the 80-day mark to the 1-day mark, 0-day mark, or even thereafter, they can do a fully developed claim. But at that point, what is assumed is that everything that you submit is all the evidence that you have, and now you're just waiting to go through the VA process, versus maybe in the BDD where you're kind of adding additional evidence, right? And then for the file a standard disability claim through the VA will take more responsibility of gathering the evidence needed to make a decision on your claim. I'm gonna be honest with you. If you're gonna file a claim, I would do everything in your own power to get all your own records. Now, the VA has 2 forms that you can fill out, right? One gives them permission to get your medical records, right? I forgot the form number. It's an A and a B. You can fill out a form, give them basically power of attorney, say, hey, VA, you have access to all my stuff. The other form tells them at that point, I've been seeing it, Scott and White, I've been seeing it Centera, I've been seeing it all these places. And at that point, they're going to take the time to get your records. At that point, you're waiting for a third party, though. You're waiting for somebody else. If you can do everything in your power to contact all these hospitals and get your own records, I would do it, because you're at the mercy of somebody else. I don't know how much effort they're going to look for your claims. They are obligated to help you, but there's no sense of urgency than somebody else doing it themselves and calling Scott. Go ahead.
I was going to just say, so the difference between these two then is you getting your own medical records versus the VA making a request to Scott and White to send you. And Scott and White is a local, like a Texas, actually it's probably bigger than that, but a Texas-based hospital chain. That's why we're using it as an example.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Texas and he came from Texas. So anyway, there's that mutual little thing there. But what you're saying, though, is that the VA then would request the records to the hospital versus you personally saying, hey, I need my personal records from the hospital. That's
absolutely.
These two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can still, even with the regular claim, if you still had all your stuff, you could still do a standard claim or a fully developed claim with your own records. You can tell your VSO, hey, here are all my records. I have all the evidence you need. I was in a car accident on leave. I got my record. I have my military treatment facility record. I have my dental record, everything else. And that's going to make everybody's job easier, because there's less forms and there's less time, because as you're waiting for your records to be obtained from somebody else, you're just waiting around for them to kind of contact you and say, okay, we have all your records. Let's get all the exams scheduled.
Now, in all three of these options, you're still going to go through a VA examination
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the VA doctors, whoever they assign you to, to have their own evaluation made of each of the claims that you've asked for support on, right?
Yeah, more than likely. I don't even know if I've ever seen it. There are cases where they can just look at a record and say, hey, you know what? We have enough evidence. We can make a decision based on this. But I don't even know if I've ever personally seen it. I'm gonna be honest with you.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's, sometimes they can look, okay, say we've seen this. We're gonna award you a rating, but I'd say you have a 99% chance of them contact you and say, we're going to take blood. We're going to get your vitals. We're going to have you do range of motion on your back. We're going to do a mental health examination. I mean, it's broken down. I tell everybody from your nose to your toes. Yeah. And they're going to, I guess, trust but verify and see if it's still, I guess if it's still current. That's one of the things I could say is, yep, you still have this pain issue, you have the headache issue or whatever, the sleep issue. Yeah, but they're going to trust but verify.
Perfect. Okay, so now, I mean, this is really the service members' process. They are the ones who have to go through all of these medical exams. It's their medical forms, but transition is never an individual process, right? I mean, the family, the military family, the spouse have to be involved. So this next question for you is, when we're talking about this, benefits, disability, discharge, or filing a VA claim, separate from that, where is it that a military spouse or the family can help support the process for the service member?
Yeah, that's good. So before the VA came out with that separation health assessment, I used to tell everybody to get with their spouse and their particularly older children who kind of understand health and say, hey, I need you to write a list of everything that I complain about or I've normalized or I've self-medicated, right? And they may say something like, man, there was a time when you could walk the dog around the block and you had no issues, but now you got to put on your knee brace and your ankle brace and you're going to take a Motrin, which is probably not normal to walk around the block, right? And all these other things. That was before the health assessment. As a spouse or an older child, teenage, young adult, I'm going to be honest with you, I would look at that health assessment, especially as a spouse, and say, I can look at it right now and say, you know what, you're always complaining about, and we just had this conversation, my wife and I, a couple of days ago. She's like, how long have you had this ear issue? I had an ear injury like 99 on my first deployment. And I got seen for it and everything. But a spouse may say, ear, nose, throat trouble. Man, you're always complaining about ringing your ears or pain in your ear. Have you been seen? Right? You always have heartburn. Right? Have you been seen? And what's interesting about the VA process is that, I'll say from your nose to your toes. And I'm not sure if everything is. So let's talk about like heartburn. If I eat something and I get heartburn once, okay. But if I know I'm going to go into heartburn or heartburn is more frequent, there could be an underlying issue there. Right. Mm-hmm. And the idea with being seen by specialists is trying to figure out, heartburn every meal or once a week, headaches every day, pain, all this stuff. It may not be normal, and I remember before I retired, I was in my kitchen. I'm not going to tell you how much Motrin I took, but my wife was like, that's not normal. But in my mind, I'm going to be honest with you, it was normal. I'd been doing that for years.
Yeah.
And a spouse is going to say, civilians, we don't do that. we get seen, right? You always complain about your back. You complain about your asthma. The list, I think, covers almost every body part. Or, there's 15 pages, and they're going to say, you've never been seen, you need to get seen, or you haven't got seen. You've been seen once. Were you ever diagnosed, or did they just say you have a back strain and now you're using Bengay, right? You've replaced, your cologne with Bengay, right? Yeah. But I think that list will give a great view of the entire service member or the veteran and say, yep, you got this, this, this. Have you been seen? And quite honestly, they may have an honest conversation with you. They may say, you know what? You used to be, very mellow-headed, but now you're a lot more irritable. You can't sleep. You're not the same person. So what I will tell the service member or the veteran, you may want to put your feelings in your pocket, because they may tell you some stuff where you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And this is just, just to throw this out there, this is something I've talked about in other live streams, but the disability, the claims process for my spouse and I brought up issues that he was not prepared to have conversations about.
Absolutely.
Experiences that he had while deployed, things he'd never told me, things he'd compartmentalized. And so I just want to put this out there that when you're going through this process, it can become very emotional for the service member and the spouse to have to talk about the changes and the differences that we've seen in the family dynamics, the relationship, the individual as part of this process. So thank you for bringing that up. That is such a huge, important part of understanding the claims process as well.
Yeah, I just had a spouse tell me the same exact thing last week. She's like, we were kind of talking, and he told me this, and I didn't know any of this. And now it kind of explains, and the conversation like this it's more or less the mental health portion, right? She said, now it really explains the isolation or the outbursts, and some of these things were brought to my attention. I was like, holy smokes. Right. So it could be going through this. And, one of the questions I've been asked before is, there is a balance, between, and I think one of the biggest mistakes a service member getting out can do is do the transition by themselves. And you mentioned that earlier. But one of the questions I do get from some spouses is, can it be overly involved? Right. And I think that's kind of up to the service member. Some service members are very kind of personal. They don't want to talk about stuff. So it's not, I would say maybe kind of tread lightly, hey, have you thought about, you don't want to show up with the checklist and say, hey, let's go over this. But you may say, hey, what do you know about VA disability? I've heard about it. Can we kind of talk about it? Or this is what I heard. And kind of, instead of jumping into 10 feet of water, you may hang out in a baby pool and then kind of build up on it. And then let that service member veteran sort of say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Maybe I don't sleep well at night, or maybe I do isolate, or maybe I do skip meals, or maybe that back pain, I do, I am going to go to medical now, for all these things. But it's all in that person. Some people want the involvement, some don't. I would tell people, I think one of my biggest mistakes when retiring was not involving my own spouse in particularly this area, because I went through my whole claim. She's like, what are you doing? I was like, well, I'm doing this. But I should have done what I told everybody. I should have said, hey, tell me everything that I, complain about. And she probably would have had a laundry list, because she's told me before. She just told me recently. She's like, you don't have the body of a 44-year-old. And I've heard that before and I just had somebody tell me that a month or two ago, 36. And they're like, oh, well, I have knee pain, but it's from old age. I'm like, you're 36. I'm like, you probably have knee pain from running up and down flight lines and flight decks and ladder wells, and you may have injured it sometimes. So constant knee pain is not normal.
Yeah.
That's you don't have a 36-year-old knee. You probably have a 70-year-old knee by now.
That's hysterical. Okay, so yes, absolutely. Everything you're saying is absolutely correct. And a military spouse, definitely tread lightly, go at the pace of the service member. But remember, this is something you can start talking about years in advance.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
They're having trouble sleeping 3 years out, you can say something like, you've been having trouble sleeping. Maybe you should get a sleep at the sleep center. It doesn't have to wait. That conversation doesn't have to wait until the 180-day mark when the BDD process can begin. So keep that in mind.
And that's a good point. And we all know that referrals, and I won't name any organizations, can take a while. So I just talked to somebody today, and they put in for a referral, it's going to be 90 days until they can get seen by the specialist. So imagine if you're already in your 180-day window. So some of the stuff does, like you said early on out, like, hey, have you thought about this? Because, you get seen by a PCM, they give you Motrin. You get seen by a PCM again 2 months later. Then like, let's get a specialist. Then you get the referral. Then you see the specialist. That could be 6, 7, 8 months down the line, and that's not unrealistic.
Yeah,
and you're already past. You could be out. I've spoken to people and they're like, man, my appointment's not until after I get out. I'm like, what? So but I get people, they don't want, especially more senior individuals, they don't want to seem like they're in sick bay more than they are at their desk. But that documentation can be extremely important. It could be the difference between being service connected and not service connected.
Absolutely. Now, yes. And that's a big deal. If, when you're looking at your disability rating, that service connected or not service connected is what is the deciding factor there. So thank you so much. Okay. So Tyrone, we're going to end this with, what is your one word of advice for transitioning military families? What is it that you would tell all of them? It can be about the BDD process. It can be about anything in general, but as a retired service member and somebody who helps hundreds of families through this process, what would you say to them?
I would say that the biggest thing is the overall involvement. And that's everybody, and I'll see some of the mistakes I'll make. Well, like one of the mistakes I see with service members are getting out, they know they have to look for a job because they're not going to have any job any longer. But if you're relocating and your spouse works, they also have to look for a job. Or maybe they don't work, but they plan on relocating and they want to work now. Another thing I often tell people is that sometimes with the spouses, the roles will change. It's very, and sometimes selfishly, to assume that the service member's role is more important than the spouse. And I remember being in situations where like, man, I got a phone call. We need to be ready to leave tomorrow morning. But that's the life. Right. Now you may role switch, and the spouse's role as far as their employment goals, education goals are more important. Your kids, you may decide, hey, we want to move back to whatever state you're from. And the kids were like, well, wait a minute. I've been around my friends, these last 2 or 3 years. I thought I was going to graduate from high school here. I thought I was going to go through to college down the street. What does that mean for me to relocate? So the relocation, the education, all these conversations should be very open. And I guess the question I would encourage somebody to ask if they're separated or retire is, how do you envision our life after separation? Right. And that could involve, I love my job. I love what I do. The work-life balance is great. But a family member, a child or a spouse may say, well, I kind of envision you being home more often. Right. The baseball games, the basketball games, the picnics, all these things. But if they're looking for a role that is just as demanding, sometimes of civilian jobs, they travel. Or just because you're a civilian doesn't necessarily mean you're only working 40 hours a week. Trust me. Right. So what does a family envision retirement life or separation life look like for everybody?
That is a fantastic word of advice. And sitting down and having that conversation. I mean, if you talk to any retired military family, one of the things at the top of their I wish I'd done more of list is have those conversations. I don't think I know a single retired or transitioned family that doesn't say, I wish we'd talked more about these things before we were forced to make a decision. Because when it comes down to that, you're forced to make a decision time, that panic, right? And there's that what if. Anyway, it's very stressful. And so I love that word of advice, Tyrone. Thank you so much. Let's tell everyone. So listen, Tyrone is an expert on this. This man, if you are not following him on LinkedIn, wait, let me throw this up here. If you're not following him on LinkedIn, you need to be, because he posts regularly about a variety of transition and retirement related topics, with links and resources and information, and he's fantastic about getting back to you about it. But tell everyone where on LinkedIn to find you. And I had to put this, you better call Tyrone, because he adds that to the end of all of his LinkedIn.
Yeah.
All of his LinkedIn posts, and I love it so much. It's like his tagline. So tell everyone how to connect with you, Tyrone.
Yeah, if you want, I mean, you can either follow me or you can definitely connect. If you have any kind of transition questions, whether it's about some of the stuff we spoke about today or just questions in general, I do have a checklist I did create. I can share that with you. It's basically years of lessons learned from myself and other transitioners, a lot of eye-opening stuff. Connect with me. You can message me. I do phone calls with service members, spouses, or both all the time, just to ask general questions, or you can send a message and say, I have a question. And typically what I try to do is, if I give you an answer, is I try to give you the resource. If I say, hey, this is the rule, the law, somebody just asked a question about moving, relocation. I'm like, this is the answer. Here's an updated joint travel regulations, because I try to stay away from being either a C lawyer or a barrack lawyer, because I know that can be disastrous. But connect with me, ask a question, and I'll do my best to give you either the answer or the answer in the resource.
Yes, thank you so much. You heard that straight from him. I mean, this is a guy you want to know if you are getting ready to transition. So jump on LinkedIn and start to follow him. If you can't find his profile, connect with me. I'll make sure you get in touch with Tyrone.
Absolutely.
Okay, we are at the end of our live stream. This was a fantastic conversation. I don't even have a feeling. I know for sure that people learned things that they did not know. I know I did, and I feel better prepared to support my fellow military spouse and service members as they are getting ready to go through this process.
Yep.
Our next live stream is happening on July 13th at 12:30, and I have Kate Horrell, who is an accredited financial planner, and she's an expert on military personal finances. But she's coming on to talk about the Survivor Benefit Plan open season. I know you've seen this thrown out there. If you are looking at part of the Survivor Benefit Plan now and you're like, what is open season? This is like a once in a lifetime. It's never happened before, and who knows if it will ever happen again. So you're going to want to jump on this live stream with Kate to talk about the who, the what, the why of open season for SBP. Anyway, okay, so pulling that down, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest today, Tyrone. The information you provided is so helpful, timely, it's so good. And I really appreciate all that you do for our transitioning military families and service members and everybody. And as we say goodbye, I'm just going to remind everyone to connect with Tyrone and make sure that you are jumping on and finding out what's going on SpouseLink. You can go to spouselink.afma.com to get the latest and greatest updates. Sign up for our newsletter, which come, I think, once a month currently, and give you an update on what live streams are happening, the blogs that have been written and posted, our social media campaigns that are going out to support, inform, and inspire. And with that, we thank you all for joining us here for the SpouseLink live stream, and we will see you next week when I talk with Kate.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you later.